Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to day 2 of our staff Causerie, organized by the Department of English, School of Languages, St. Joseph's College, Bengaluru. I'm Archita and I will be hosting today's session. Yesterday was day 1 and we heard from 2 of our colleagues, Dr. Achyut Ajit and Dr. Lilikuti Abraham. Today we have 3 speakers. We have Dr. Tauseef Qamar, Ms. Einstina Sneha and Mr. Nigel George who will be talking to us. So without any further delay, let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Tauseef Qamar. Dr. Qamar hails from Patna. He did his undergraduation, post-graduation and his PhD from university. He's presented several papers on Indic machine translations, phonology, phonetics, and ESP. He's worked as a language engineer and speech scientist at Nuance Communication, a leading US-based MNC. Dr. Tauseef has a keen interest in studying how differently people speak and the reasons behind them from a linguistic standpoint. His talk today is titled, "Why is Linguistics a Scientific Study?" Dr. Tauseef, over to you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Optimally audible to everyone?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. And first of all, I'm deeply thankful to Dr. Archita, and thanks for introducing me. So before delaying much, I'll first I will just start sharing my screen, and that will make some sense that what I'm going to talk about, right? And please let me know when you're able to see my screen.
Yes, Dr. Tauseef, we're able to see your screen.
Yes, so this is the title slide, Why is Linguistics a Scientific Study? So these are the key highlights that what we are going to get from this particular presentation, right? So there are 3 things that we'll be talking. First thing, that is, of course, the origin of the term linguistics. The second, on defining linguistics, right? And of course, the third thing, why is linguistic a scientific study, right? So quickly, let me move to the next slide. Has the slide changed? The term linguistics, can you see this?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, friends. So when this term we encounter first, so we often encounter the question that how many languages do you speak, right? So it is not related to particularly speaking different languages, rather.
Dr. Tauseef, I'm sorry for disturbing you. There's a request if you could make your screen full screen.
Full screen. I think I have shared my full screen.
Because
yeah, from my end, this is showing that I have shared full screen.
So please put it in slideshow.
Let me
slideshow.
Can you see?
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
So I was talking something that whenever a person who is new to linguistics and after hearing this particular term, they come with second question or first question, you can say, that how many languages you know, or what are the things that you do in linguistics. So linguistics is not something about knowing different languages. Specifically, if you have an idea or you know multiple languages, so there is a specific term for that, polyglot, right? So we'll be not talking about polyglots, right? So linguistics, the word linguistics has been derived from Latin word lingua plus istics. So lingua stands for tongue and istics stands for language or science, right? It studies not only one particular language, but of human languages in general. I'll be talking in detail. What do we mean by particular language and in a general language in general sense, right? So it attempts to describe and analyze languages. Let's say, for example, we do have different conventions to measure different realities and substances. Let's say, for example, if I have to measure the wind pressure, so I'm going to imply some yardage scale that is called barometer or something, right? So if we have to measure, you can say liquid, right? So will imply something called liter yard scale, or you can say kilo yard scale, right? But if you have to measure the language, right, what technique you will use, right? What yard scale you will use? So here comes linguistics, right? So first I'll go to defining linguistics. So linguistics is a scientific study of language, and it involves an analysis of language form, language meaning, and language in context, right? So the moment I said that linguistics is a scientific study, so let's have a look on the definition of the pure science, right? Science is a systematized knowledge derived from observation, study, and experimentation carried on to determine the nature and the principles of what is being studied. So in case of linguistics, what we are doing, we are just analyzing human languages, right? Not in a particular reference. Rather, we are taking human languages in general, right? So when I say that we are observing something and we are reporting something, so it gives sense that we are talking about the properties of language. When I say human language, so it gives sense that human languages are composed of different components, right? Let's say, for example, there are different sounds that we combined to create different words. Eventually, we combine different words to create a grammatically valid sentence. I mean, when I say grammatically valid sentence, right? So you will look that there are certain principles responsible at the same time. There are certain constraints that you cannot use two particular sounds in succession, right? Let's say, for example, two voice sounds, right? Or you can say there is a constraint that you cannot use PASA combination in case of psychology, though we write PS, but we don't articulate, right? So there we have a rule in English that this particular psychology should be called as psychology, not psychology, right? So these kind of rules we study, and we try to derive different rules. Why we do so? Why we are articulating something different? Though we have written something different, but we are articulating something different. So this makes linguistics a scientific study. Let's have a look why we call linguistics scientific study, right? There are few reasons to call linguistics a science because of the following, right? Objectivity, empiricism, and systematic investigation that we offer in terms of language, right? So quickly have a look. When we talk about linguistics as a science, so we don't reject any language as a substandard one, right? Because in case of linguistics, what we do, we actually welcome wholeheartedly every language. In other words, this is the scenario, and this is the fundamental idea that you cannot say something English which cannot be said in a typically local language or a tribal language, right? There is a possibility that you may have sophisticated lexical choices in, you can say, so-called you can say high status language, but whatever you can say using a standard language, so-called standard language, that same idea, the same feeling can be expressed in case of, you can say, typically local language. Eventually, if a language that exists and you can say that is only being spoken by 4 or 5 people, eventually the same, you can say, feeling, expression, they can express in terms of their own language. Therefore, we try to achieve the objectivity, right? So objectivity is that it considers all language to be equal, right? We don't distinguish, we don't actually discriminate any language on the basis of their speakers, on the basis of their region, on the basis of their culture, on the basis of race, right? Because language is something sensitive. Language cannot be studied in isolation, right? If you have to consider language, there has to be a culture related to that language. Therefore, we say if a language dies, that there is a possibility that a culture will also die, right? So when we talk about the objectivity, so we try to welcome every language wholeheartedly, and we consider every language equally, right? So this is second point, empiricism. So it relies on observation and experimentations and uses formalized principles and theory capable of formulation. So in this sense, what we do, let's say, for example, in case of English, there are other languages where you will find a contradiction between what you write and what you speak, right? You have written, let's say, for example, letter C, but in either case, either you have to call sign in case of CINE, or you can say in case of CAT, cat, you are not articulating something C, right? In case of sign, you are articulating something sa. In case of cat, you are articulating something ka, right? So this kind of contradiction you come over when you try to make an empirical evidence and you try to experiment something and you give some reasons why you are calling so. Though you have written different, but you are articulating differently. So here comes the point. A famous linguist, some people call him a semitician called Ferdinand de Saussure, right? So he came with a groundbreaking idea that if you are talking something about the language, or so language is basically a kind of whole system. So what people were mainly interested studying in before the emergence of linguistics, they were mainly interested in studying, you can say, written aspect of the language, right? So if you go by the written form of the language only, then you will encounter such kind of problem. You write something different, you articulate something different. Then Ferdinand de Saussure came with the idea that you are actually ignoring another important part of, you can say, language system that is spoken from the form of the language. And they came with another set of different terminologies, right? I'm not going to talk about it. So there you will realize that why you are articulating differently, right? So if you have to talk specifically on linguistic standpoint, so you have to formulate rules, right? So it aims to analyze the data and make generalization about the regularities, right? It is not so that you say something abruptly, right? You first observe the data, then you experiment the data, then you come with final findings, right? And that should be regular. Let's have a look on these examples, right? I'm sure that you'll be able to see plural marker S case, right? So in this case, you will realize that S is being articulated differently depending on 3 different conditions, right? And there is a reason for that. Let's say, for example, in case of cats, you call it as sa sound, right? But in case of dogs, though you have written S, right? S, but you articulate something za, dogs, not dogs, right? In case of roses, though you have written es, you are articulating is it as something or is, right? Roses or roses, right? So you will realize that what we do in linguistics, we try to formulate a theory in terms of regularity. What should be regular, right? So in case of S, we do have 3 conditions. If S is preceded by, you can say, voiceless consonant, right? As in case of cats, we can see the preceding sound of S is ta sound. So ta is a voiceless sound, right? Therefore, it remained voiceless sa sound. But in case of dogs, you will realize that why we are articulating za instead of writing sa, just because of the property of ga sound, right? So ga is a voice sound. Therefore, S has copied the feature, or you can say ga has influenced or assimilated sa into za. Likewise, here you will also realize in case of roses, though you have written sa, but you call it za at the end of rose, right? Za. So again, you will realize that the moment you articulate za, that is a voice sound. Therefore, it has changed the property of voiceless sa sound, right? So these are the 3 conditions, and you will find regularity. You cannot come with an example where you will say that no, there is a fourth condition or 5th condition where I can articulate S differently, right? So these are the things that we try to actually achieve when we say something empiricism in case of linguistics. I had talked something about voiceless sound and voice sounds, right? So you will realize when you say there are speech sounds, so you will realize that speech sounds can be bifurcated into consonant sounds and vowel sounds, right? So both are articulated differently, right? So if you will look to consonant sounds, though there are certain, you can say, friction inside your oral cavity, or you can say larynx or larynx, and so how you can measure like between voiceless consonant sounds and voice consonants? Put your 2 fingers on your throat, and you will realize that there are certain sounds, right? In which case you feel some vibration, but actually the intensity is lesser. But in case of voice consonant sounds, you will feel a greater intensity of vibration. Let's say, for example, pa and ba. So in case of pa, you will also feel some kind of vibration on the throat, but in case of ba, you will feel some greater vibration. So this is the idea. And if sa is preceded by a voiceless sound, so that will remain sa, voiceless, right? If sa will be preceded or followed by a voice sound like ba da ga, so that will change its property, or you can say that will assimilate into a voice sound, right? So you will also realize that when we talk about empiricism, or you can say that when we talk about the capturing the regularity, how regular it should be a particular phenomena. So in case of past tense marker, you will also realize that this idea works here as well, right? Instead of, let's say, for example, writing convinced, you are not articulating something da at the end, right? Rather, you will change again da into da, right? So it gives sense that what you have done here, you have just changed the voice da sound into da sound, right? So this is a regular pattern. Let's say, for example, in case of jumped, also you do, though you write something jumped, ed, but you articulate something da, right? So these are the things that we study under empiricism, right? So systematic, this is the third point that makes linguistics a scientific study, right? So the approach and the methodology that you imply that makes a systematic investigation of a language. Let's say, for example, you are not what are the things that I have explained? I was not talking in something like abruptly and randomly. There is a system, and someone has systematically studied it. And how they have studied it? First, they have listened, and then made some observation. Then they reported that why you are doing so. Let's say, for example, in case of sign and in case of cat, if letter C is followed by I sound, I letter, that will remain sa, right? And if letter C is being followed by a vowel, so that will change into ka sound, right? So these kind of generalizations and these kind of notations you write there. And how you do it? Just by systematically investigating phenomena, what you observe in terms of language. The other thing that I would like to talk about something, when you talk about these kind of differences in terms of letters and sounds. So here comes the point that Ferdinand de Saussure talked something about that if you are considering language as a whole structure, then you cannot ignore the spoken part of the language. Then they came with the idea, and made claim that written aspect of the language is not the concrete one. What is concrete one? That is a spoken form of the language. Therefore, you write something different and you articulate something different. And the moment you articulate something, that gets physical reality. There you can talk about some phonetic notations, right? Physical property of a particular sound, right? And combining two different, or you can say several different sounds, you just create different words, right? So there you will realize that each particular sound, every particular sound is typically different in the sense that in order to change the meaning of a word, you not need to change the whole word, right? If you will simply replace a phoneme, right? Therefore, we call it phoneme. If you will change a particular sound with another sound, the meaning will change. Let's say, for example, in case of pin and bin, what you're doing, you're not changing the whole three letters. Rather, you have altered pa with ba sound, and the meaning has changed. Therefore, Ferdinand de Saussure came with the idea that if you have to consider language as, you can say, whole structure, then you cannot only talk about the written aspect of the language. Rather, you must consider and you must give equal importance to the spoken form of the language, right? Then these are the some of the subfields of linguistics. I'm not going to talk in detail because each of them has their own intricacies and detailed elaboration. I will be shortly talking about all these fields, right? So when you will look to the convention, and you can say the flow chart of this term linguistics, so it stands on, you can say, 5 subfields, right? Phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics, eventually pragmatics as well. So in let's say, for example, how you can define and how you can differentiate between two sounds. Not theoretically, this is possible unless you talk something about what are the articulators responsible for the production of a particular sound, right? Let's say, for example, when I say articulator, so there are several speech organs. Let's say, for example, tongue, our lips, or you can say upper teeth. These are the organs. Eventually, your uvula and you can say your lungs. These are the speech organs responsible for the production of human speech sounds. Then you will realize that how you distinguish one sound with another sound in terms of their place of articulation. So place of articulation is basically where you touch two articulators. Let's say, for example, if you have to articulate ta, so you will realize that you are raising your tip of the tongue, right? The most front position of tongue that we call tip of the tongue. You are raising your tip of the tongue and you are touching somewhere in the area behind your upper teeth, right? Ta, ta. So what we are doing in linguistics, eventually in subfields of linguistics, we started talking specifically about each sound, how you articulate, right? What is the impact if you change the place of articulation? Let's say, for example, in case of English, you won't have interdental ta, right? So how we are able to classify? Just on the basis of point of articulation. If you will change the point of articulation, the meaning, if you will change the point of articulation, you will articulate different sound, right? And when there is a different sound, so there is a possibility that you are going to talk about, or there will be a meaning change of the word, right? So in phonetics, we talk about the production, transmission and reception of human speech sounds, right? So let's say, for example, in every language, you produce several speech sounds. So there are different articulators responsible for it. And the moment you articulate that sound, that will travel, right? So for traveling, that sound requires some kind of, you can say, channel, right? So let's say, for example, if you're talking someone physically, so air becomes the mode of traveling, right? So there you will realize the moment you have articulated, so that gets some physical reality. Let's say, for example, in case of P, right? If pa will occur at word initial position, so you will realize that there are certain speakers of English, let's say, for example, American or especially Britishers, they articulate something with some aspiration, pin. They can't say pin simply, right? So pin. So the moment one has articulated a particular pa sound in a particular position, so in that sense, you can say this is the physical property of pa when it is occurring at word initial level, right? When the same pa occurs at word final position, right? In case of, let's say, for example, nip, right? Something nip. So in case of nip, you will realize that you're not articulating pa with some aspiration, not something nip, right? But when P occurs at word initial position, you are articulating with aspiration, something pin, right? So the moment you fix a position, the moment you articulate a particular sound in a particular word, in a particular position, that gets physical reality, right? And depending on their, you can say, place of occurrence in a particular word, the physical reality of the same word may differ, right? So this is all about phonetics. Roughly, I had been talking about phonetics. So when you talk about the phonetics, so you will realize that you are talking about the production, transmission and reception of human speech sounds in general sense. But there is another terminology called phonology, right? So in phonology, you will realize that there is a sound system. So in phonology, what we talk about, in phonology, we mainly interested in studying the, you can say, how sounds are organized in a particular language, or you can say this organization of sound system in a particular language. Therefore, we call something Hindi phonology, Urdu phonology, Arabic phonology, English phonology, blah, 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 right? But when you talk about the phonetics, so you are not associating phonetics with any particular language, because production is something, right, that is very typical to the human organs. Therefore, in phonetics, we are not attaching any phonetics of something, a particular language. But in case of phonology, since there is a possibility that each language or every language may have different sound system. Let's say, for example, in case of English, you won't find that much sounds as you can find in case of Hindi, Urdu, and Arabic, right? Therefore, we say that when we attempt to study about the sound system under the hood of phonology, so we are talking about a particular language. Of course, in morphology, we study about the structure and the forms of word, or you can say different words in human language. Syntax is roughly about, you can say, the structure of a sentence, right? How words are interrelated in a sentence, right? In semantics, of course, we are talking about the meaning of a sentence, right? So I have come to the end of this causerie, but before winding it up, I would like to just talk something about that is very crucial, right? So there are three main questions posed by Chomsky in 1968. I think that most of you have heard the name of Noam Chomsky. So Chomsky is the figure in linguistics who is somehow considered as a father of modern linguistics as well. So he came with the groundbreaking ideas, right? So he posed many questions, and he wrote a very famous book called Syntactic Structure, and they came with several groundbreaking ideas. So these are the three questions that Chomsky asked, right, to to linguist community, or you can say to language teachers as well, right? How is language, how is knowledge of language acquired, right? So you will realize that you don't need to go to school in order to acquire a language, right? You will also realize the moment you have joined your school, or you can say college, before that you were proficient enough to articulate several words, several sentences. So how you have done it? Just you have acquired from the society, right? From your house, from your parents, right? From your surroundings, from your siblings, from your neighbors, right? You have simply acquired it the moment you you can say grown up in the society, right? So then there is a notion of this acquisition. This is a basically theory mainly propounded by, you can say, B.F. Skinner, that and B.F. Skinner is basically, I think, psychologist something, right? So in language acquisition case, the theory given by B.F. Skinner was very dominating, that you acquire language from the society, right? Then Chomsky came with the idea that if you say that everything is being acquired with the society, so how one is able to, or you can say one is able to just recognize eventually the new sentence, right? So then they came with the idea that you actually don't acquire from the society, rather there is a language acquisition device in the mind of every child born with that particular device called language acquisition device. And in that device, every information related to your language or grammar, that is hardwired there, right? In every human brain. So and with the course of time, when a child, you can say, explore things in the society, so with the course of time they use their knowledge of, you can say, nativity, or with the course of time they explore things in terms of objects and all languages. So then the third thing came with the idea. Another scholar called William Labov. So they came with the idea that if you consider that everything is stored in the mind, so structurally the brain is same, be it a tribal child, be it an American child, be it an Arabic child, be it an you can say, be it you can say Hindi child, but despite having similarity in terms of brain, because there is no asymmetry in terms of brain, be it Indian child or American child, still there is a variation in the society, right? So why do people vary? So they came with the idea that only mentalism is not responsible, rather social factors, linguistic factors are responsible, and he made the claim something, that language is not something homogeneous, right? But language is something heterogeneous, and there are certain idea, and he came with, you can say, dominating thing, dominating claim, and he claimed that no two speaker of the same language speaks in the same way, in the sense that you will also realize that if everything is stored in your mind, hardwired in your mind, so there should not be any difference in terms of British English, American English, Indian English, eventually in Indian English, South Indian English, North Indian English, Bengali English, right? Blah 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 blah. So why these things taking place? Why are these why this particular variation is taking place? Just because of the several factors. That could be linguistic factors. That could be, you can say, extra linguistic factors. Let's say, for example, when I say linguistic factors, so it gives sense that I'm talking about in terms of, you can say, social variables, right? You can say based on the gender you vary, right? Based on the occupation, your language is different, right? Based on the geographical location, because you belong to a particular geographical location, therefore you are unable to articulate a particular sound, or you are able to articulate a particular sound. Let's say, for example, there is a sound called ka. articulated from, you can say, post-glottal area, somewhere below the Adam's apple, right? So that is typically limited to, you can say, natives of Arabic speaker, right? Eventually, I can read the script because I belong to a community, or you can say my mother tongue is Urdu. So the script of Urdu, though remains Arabic and Persian, I can read Arabic, but the way they can articulate qa sound, I'm unable to do it, right? So these are the things that came with the idea that there are certain reasons why people differ from each other, right? So these are the questions Chomsky has posed, and still this remains very pivotal in linguistics. So competence and performance, you can go through the definition and you will understand what are these things. So this was all about my lecture and presentation. So thank you all. I am not sure whether you were able to get something or not, right?
Thank you so much, Dr. Tauseef. That was an extremely informative talk. If there are questions from the audience, please use the chat box available to you to put down your questions. Those of you watching us on YouTube, you can put your questions there as well. While we wait for questions from the audience, Dr. Tauseef, I have two questions for you, if I may. I'm interested in knowing what got you interested into this field. Like, when did you do your master's in this?
Yes, actually graduation, right? So honestly speaking, since this subject is, you can say, really studied subject, so accidentally I took admission in linguistics at undergraduate level. When I attended phonetics class with my professor, Professor Imtiaz this time, so I was very fascinated that though I accidentally admitted this course, but I'm fortunate to meet this accident, right? So he started talking something about difference in pronunciation, how we do, and what are the reasons why we call somewhere, though we write something C, we articulate sa, we articulate ka, right? And eventually, in terms of sa, you will realize that the moment I was expressing sa, za, as, right? So what I realized that if you have to choose career as a, you can say, as a teacher, especially a teaching of English languages, so linguistics or linguistics will offer you much more than being a teacher of having no background of linguistics, especially phonetics.
Thank you. What a happy accident then.
Yes. So
okay, we have a question in the chat by an EJP student. Very informative presentation, sir. What's the future of linguistics according to you? As in, are we on the verge of major breakthroughs in this field? Perhaps some promising theories gaining prominence that we should be excited about?
Let's be practical when I talk about linguistics. So I'm not going to make you fool, right? So see, I don't know how people actually see. This depends on hiring body, how they just want to adjust you, right? But if you don't want to go into academics, so there are companies like Amazon, Google, and so they are offering people. They mainly hire people, especially from linguistics background, because you will realize that in, let's say, for example, we had a lecture on something linguistic diversity. So professor was also talking that in, let's say, for example, 20 to 30 years, we won't be able, we will not be able to write something much, right? Eventually, we started realizing that, right? If you have an option to speak something, so you just give some command, okay, Google, find some place near, and there you will realize that we actually not using that kind of technique that we write something on a paper and you give input to the machine, though we do some kind of, you can say, modeling of the language that suits to, you can say, algorithm of the system, right? And there you will find that they cannot do without the knowledge of linguistics, right? So to train computer science engineers in order to offer extensive course, they simply hire linguists, people from linguistics background, and they ask them to develop some rules, notations, all right, how different combinations are created, what are the possible combinations and all, right? So I'm also planning to my students that once I'll finish the syllabi, so I'll be talking something about the practical aspects, what you can do in natural language processing, one of the prominent and promising area.
I mean, I don't know, is that what you did in that US multinational company? I was wondering what a language speech scientist and a language engineer meant.
Actually, you see, when you talk about these two conventions, language engineer or speech scientist, so you will realize that actually, in case of language engineering, what you are doing, you are just engineering the product in terms of language, right? Therefore, they call you language engineer, right? You engineer the language in order to meet the requirements of machine and algorithm. You make some adjustments in order to fit the requirements of algorithm. Therefore, they call language engineer, right?
Okay. Any more questions?
So
okay.
let me answer something more, because I think he's a student of EJP. So see, when you have the knowledge of linguistics, so you will realize that the moment you will go into the moment you will go deeper into the linguistics, so there are certain domains, right? There are certain specifications. So as a linguist, you can go in corporate as well, right? Like content writing, natural language processing, where you can have a role of language engineers, speech scientists, blah, 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 right? Eventually, I'll tell you a fascinating fact about these companies. They hire professors from different universities, because actually, see, writing a rule from language perspective, that is not possible for computer science engineers, because they don't have that kind of background and you can say peculiarity and extensiveness, right? So they hire professors, or you can say consultants from linguistics background, and they offer good package, because that professor is going to something, they are going to offer you something blueprint, actually, that will, you can say, going to do some great magic. Let's say, for example, in case of Siri, the developer of Siri's Nuance, where I had been working, right? So there I was responsible for taking care of Indian English, right? What initially they have done in most cases, let's say, for example, if you would have realized the Google speech support, especially Google Map speech support 5 years ago, so you would have been realizing that though the voice I'm getting out of that particular device or mobile, they are speaking something Malayali, Kannada, or Hindi, but actually they are not speaking the way we used to speak. So they used to hire people from US, though they are Indian. So this is the fundamental idea, that when you are expecting to record the data, so a person should belong, or should be there in a particular context, or you can say in contact with that particular language from 8 to 10 years, right? Because you will realize the moment you will migrate to America, so slightly you will realize that after 1 or 2 years spending there, you will realize that your English has entirely changed, right? You have started something called pin, right? Car. So accent is something naturally acquired. So you have a good opportunity there as well. Does linguistics have mathematics? Yes, mathematics principle of axioms, right? Why you write she, why you write he, right? So there is a principle of axioms, right? So there, I cannot talk much about that, because that will again create confusion. Yeah, mathematical notations. Eventually, in natural language processing, eventually in computer science courses, they talk something about, you can say, natural intelligence and artificial intelligence, right? So you will find that there are, especially in India, we don't have linguistics in case of, you can say, studied in computer science faculties, but in foreign you will find that linguistics is kept under computer science faculty, right? Mathematical science is something.
Oh, that's interesting. Crossing of linguistics from my career prospect is a comment. I think because of the maths.
Because of the maths, yeah. So there you will find rules, because see, why you call 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, because this has been tested and justified, right? The moment this will be challenged and proved something 4.1, you will start using 4.1, right? So in linguistics we do so. In linguistics also, you will realize that there are instances, and everything that is established or tested, that can be questioned, and that can be accepted once you establish another fact or you add something into it.
Thank you so much. I think there are no more questions. So thank you so much, Dr. Tauseef, for that session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It was a wonderful experience talking to you all. Okay, looking forward to meeting you.
We will now move to our second speaker for this causerie. So let me introduce Miss Einstina Sneha. Einstina Sneha is from Bangalore. She completed her bachelor's in performing arts, English and psychology from Christ Deemed to be University. She did her master's in English from Mount Carmel College. Before joining us at St. Joseph's, she worked as a lecturer at Bishop Cotton Women's Christian College. She has also completed 8 grades of music theatre performance and also holds a diploma in music theatre performance from the London College of Music. Einstina has been part of many plays staged across the country from Assam, Bangalore, and Mumbai's famous Prithvi Theatre as well. She's currently a member of a choir, Femusica, and this choir performs songs by female composers only. Needless to say, Einstina enjoys being on stage, whether it's acting or singing. And today she will be talking to us about music theatre, a form of theatrical performance that combines songs, spoken dialogue, acting, and dance. And the session is titled A Brief Introduction to the World of Music Theatre. Over to Einstina.
Thank you so much, Professor Archita. Thanks a lot. I hope you're able to see and hear. Just a second.
Yes.
Okay, great. So musical theatre is a genre of theatre. It is a combination of songs, dialogues, dance, movement that tell a story. Now, you can have a play with songs in it, but that does not necessarily make it a musical. Because in a musical, songs are not used as fillers, because songs tell a story as equal as dialogues. So which is why if you miss a song or if you skip a song in a musical, you may not understand the next scene because it's that important, right? So now I'll just give you an introduction of the important aspects of music theatre. As with all other theatrical forms, dialogue is very important. So spoken words of a musical are dialogues, usually taken from a script, and it tells the story as with all other plays. Then comes dance. So dance is the physical movement of a musical. It can either be a movement or dance, and all types of dance can be used: jazz, ballet, tap, etc. So dance is also used to further the story. So I'll give you an example. I'll play a short clipping for you from one of our college plays. So it's called Sabse Sasta Gosht, or translated to The Cheapest Meat. So it's a play about communal riots. So I'll show you how we introduce the play with a movement performance. Just a second, let me.
Einstina, just letting you know that your screen is not visible yet and you're on mute.
Oh, yes. I'll just trying to, just a second. Yes. So that was one of the that's one of the most important aspect again, dance or movement. And then comes songs. So songs are sung words of a musical. It introduces a person. So there are two types of songs. That is the I am song and I want song. I am song introduces a character and tells us what the character does, etc. And the I want song gives us the most entertaining styles of performance arts even today, because it combines all sorts of performing arts. Now, the characteristics of music theater. So one of the primary characteristics of music theater is its ability to adopt, to take on, or to adjust to new situations. So music theater thrives on its ability to adopt to new musical trends and dance trends. So when opera was created, classical music was used because it was the most popular form of entertainment at that time. And songs were also sung in Italian. However, in 1728, the British composer John Gay wrote Beggar's Opera and changed the entire musical theater journey till then, because he entirely changed it to English. So this way, it moved on from Europe to New York as well, to all other places. So in English music theater as a whole evolved even more in 1866, when The Black Crook was premiered at the first Broadway musical. This was the first musical to introduce spoken dialogues. Until then, it was sung entirely. All operas were sung entirely and acted while singing throughout for about 4 or 5 hours. But now came spoken dialogues along with singing. So the messages were extremely progressive for the time. So for the first time in 1927, the musical Showboat was written to include themes of racial prejudice. So the characters show their world of relentless drudgery, where the black workers toil while the white folks play. So throughout, this is the theme. And now we'll go on to the most important aspect of music theater, and that is the songs. So I'll tell you the different styles that I used in songs, and I have to practically show you that. So songs are the most important aspect of music theater. Now you may ask me how songs are different, how music theater songs are different from other songs. So I'll explain it to you. The first thing or the first aspect that is used in music theater singing is the conversational style of singing. So this is done in order to tell the story. So here is a song from The Little Mermaid, wherein a mermaid in the ocean, she wishes and desires and yearns to be a human being on earth. So that's the song. So I'll sing it first in not a conversational style, and then I'll do the other, so you'll know the difference. I want to be where the people are. I wanna see 'em dancing and walking around on those, what do you call them, feet? Flipping your fins, you don't get too far. Legs are required for jumping, dancing, strolling along down a, what's that word again? Street. So that was not a conversational style of singing. But in music theater, when we adopt a conversational style, it becomes, I want to be where the people are. I want to see them dancing, walking around on those, what do you call them? Oh, feet. Flipping your fins, you don't get too far. Legs are required for jumping, dancing, strolling along down a, what's that word again? Street. So that's how it becomes a conversational style. Now, the second most important thing is the stylistic diversity. So Broadway is an amalgamation of many different styles of music, tradition, R&B, classical, jazz, pop, country, etc. Especially these days, we're hearing a lot more contemporary styles in Broadway. So to give you an example of the different types and how a singer should be versatile in music theater is, some songs require a neutral larynx tone. That basically means singing in my own voice. Some songs require me to sing in my own voice. That is, raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied up with strings. These are a few of my favorite things. So that had nothing for me to do. I just had to sing it in my own song, in my own voice. Sometimes we might have to adapt a different style. I might have to sing with a head voice, with a softer tone and a head voice. Look at this stuff, isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my collection's complete? Wouldn't you think I'm the girl who has everything? So sometimes I might have to sing with a classical undertone. The hills are alive with the sound of music. So that is a few different styles. And the last one I will speak about is singing with characterization. Now, just like how you say the dialogues in character, you need to sing in character as well. So that is, for example, George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, which was made into My Fair Lady. Here we have a Cockney flower girl who is singing in anger about her English professor, Henry Higgins, who she is upset with because he is forcing her to learn English. She does not want to learn, and she does not know proper English as well. So we have, and she cannot even pronounce the name Henry Higgins. She says Henry Higgins. So if you sing this without character, it becomes, just you wait, Henry Higgins, just you wait. You'll be sorry, but your tears will be too late. You'll be broke and I'll have money. Will I help you? Don't be funny. Just you wait. Henry Higgins, just you wait. So this is without any character to the song. So when you add the character and you sing like Eliza Doolittle, I have to sing it like, just you wait, Henry Higgins, just you wait. You'll be sorry, but your tears will be too late. You'll be broke and I have money. Will I help you? Don't be funny. Oh, Henry Higgins, just you wait. So that's how you add a character to the song. Now, I will end this, but before that, you may ask me, how can this be introduced in Indian theatre? So can it be introduced in Indian theatre as well? Of course it can. So we did a song, a performance about Draupadi, and we didn't want to, immediately start the play by saying we are Draupadi, etc. So we had a song that was set, and the song only had one word, Draupadi. So we began it that way, so we could introduce the play that way with Indian music. So I will just play that to you, just the starting bit of it. So yes, it can be adopted to Indian theatre as well as any form of theatre is what I believe, and I think I will end it here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Wow, that was something. Thank you so much, Einstina. Thank you so much for those lovely bits of singing and a great introduction to the musical theater, musical theater. Thank you so much. I'm fumbling because I'm still awed by all the bits of singing that you did and the variations that you showed. So beautiful. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. If there are questions, please use the chat box, or if you're watching us on YouTube, then please leave your comments and questions there. Not doesn't just have to be questions, comments as well. I have a few questions to ask you before, while we wait for others to ask. Could you tell us something about one of your maybe most favorite performance of yours, something more about that?
Okay, so this was the Draupadi performance that I just showed. So that happened in Prithvi Theatre. So it was a beautiful performance. Towards while doing the performance itself, that was the first time that we cried on stage. Otherwise, we had to force ourselves to cry on stage during other performances. And as actors, sometimes we have to force ourselves. But there, we didn't have to. It just came, and it was beautiful. And we had got the opportunity to meet different people, different theater artists. So that was a day that we can never forget, or a performance that we can never forget.
Lovely. How long have you been doing this for?
This I started when I was 14 years old. So
Okay.
I've been into music theater from then.
So why aren't you doing this full time? I know,
Because
as someone from the department, I shouldn't be asking this question,
no,
but
no,
nonetheless.
because I love teaching as well, and I love teaching English because of all the the thing is, you can show what the society, you can mirror the society in your English classes, and you can show what's happening in the society, and the same thing happens with theater. So I would love to use theater and English and take on that journey.
That's brilliant. Since we have theater courses as well, I think that's an excellent fit. Let me just check if there are questions. Okay, any questions? Anything anyone would like to say? We have an EJP student asking you, which is your favorite musical?
Okay, the favorite one I would say is My Fair Lady. That's something I can never forget. So that's something. And the recent one, Hamilton, you all should watch it. It's on Hotstar. Yeah.
We have Etienne sir saying amazing, best to you. Shefali saying such a lovely singing and presentation.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, Einstina. Thank you for this lovely session.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to our last speaker for this evening. Let me just quickly check if Professor Nigel is here. He was having some trouble joining in. Okay, he's here. Okay, so our next speaker is Mr. Nigel George, and I have never addressed Nigel this way, so formal, because Nigel and I go back a long way. We go back all the way to 2012 when we were classmates at Joseph's doing our masters together. So it seems very, very weird to be doing such a formal introduction to him. So I'm going to try and strike a balance here because I don't think I can be so formal. So my earliest memories of Nigel have always been the MA classroom, Nigel sitting in one corner of the class with a book, and it'll probably be the heaviest, biggest book, and extremely stoic, not being disturbed by anything or anyone. And that was him for most of our MA course. And he was also that student who would read almost everything on the syllabus. I remember, I think in the second year, we had Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. huge book, Russian literature, heavy text. And I think he was the only one in class who finished that. And there was a phase. He read that for so long. And so my early memories of Nigel are always, these moments of corners of classrooms and a book and his stoicism. So that's how I always remember Nigel. So Nigel hails from Mumbai. He did his bachelor in Mumbai in communication, advertising specifically, and then he moved to Bangalore to do his master's at St. Joseph's College. After which he moved to Kechla, a small village in Odisha, where he taught underprivileged children who belong to the tribal communities there. Taught the kids there for about 2 years, and then returned to Mumbai, where he taught as a lecturer in a college, and then he's now joined us at St. Joseph's. If you have a conversation with Nigel, there's no way that he won't talk about Kechla. He claims that experience has been extremely enriching and something that's changed the way he looks at the world. And today he's going to be talking to us about that experience. And his session is titled Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Learning Through Music and Translanguaging. So over to you, Nigel. I think Nigel is having some problem with his connection. Just give us a few minutes. Nigel, can you hear me? You have unmuted yourself, but I can't hear you. Is anyone else able to hear?
Oh, guys, I just changed my internet. Can somebody tell me if I'm at least audible,
Yes.
if not visible?
Yes, you're
Yes,
visible.
Nigel, we can hear you.
Oh, right. Crazy. Okay, so as I was saying, thanks, Archita, for that introduction. And I'm glad that you stuck to only one part of your memory and not the other memories as well, right? And also, it's very true what Archita mentioned. There was actually a saying that went around in our small circles. You can remove Nigel from Kechla, but you can never remove the Kechla from Nigel, right? And that sort of has been the case even after leaving that place since 2017, right? So just a few, I would say, disclaimers that I would like to give before I begin this presentation. Firstly, I would really like to thank Tauseef and Einstina because a bit of what they did actually is very helpful into what I'm actually going to be speaking about, right? At the same time, it also does put a slight bit of pressure because my understanding of linguistics is pretty rudimentary and my singing is not as good, or my musical knowledge is not as good as Einstina's, right? I mean, she's somewhere with Julia Roberts, and I'm this pretty croaky voice over here. But so when we are talking about music and language, there's a bit of linguistics also from the angle from where I'm going to be speaking at, right? So if the screen is visible, I'm just going to take it from granted that it is visible.
Nigel, sorry. Yeah, actually, your video is off.
Okay. It's not been allowing me to come back. It's okay. The screen is visible, no?
Yeah, I think it's showing
It's
up.
I apologize to everybody. It's been acting weird since I started classes at 2 o'clock.
Yeah,
I've tried restarting it a couple of times.
We
Okay,
can see it now.
there will be slight issues that are going to happen. Please, as long as y'all can see the screen and hear my voice, I think that's good enough. Right. So I'm going to talk about this place. And for me, literally, it was a place that I found after crossing a rainbow of sorts, right? And therefore, I take out this musical reference from the movie because one of the first songs that I ever heard my students sing was the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And there itself, I think, is where a connection sort of formed with the kids over there, right? And I'm going to sort of limit the experience over there to be explaining only through the concepts of music and this idea of translanguaging that we were sharing. Yes, Archita, I'm sharing the screen. Is it still not visible?
Yeah, only your videos were turned on, but the screen is not, your screen is not visible.
No, this is...
Do you want to mail it to me? I can share it from my end.
So it's not a PPT, that's the thing.
Okay.
Otherwise, I would have mailed it. Okay, so my video is going to stop automatically when I'm sharing, right? So that's what happened. That's why it went off. Okay, I guess this is good. The screen is visible. Yeah, Chita?
Yes, visible.
Yes,
Okay.
Rajesh.
Excellent, right? So, yes, as I was saying, I picked up the name Somewhere Over the Rainbow, taking from the movie, and that was one of the first songs that we ever heard them speak. So, in the course of this talk, I'll limit myself. There are many other things, social issues, political issues, which may or may not be alluded to, but it's not possible to relate to everything in the course of the small talk, right? But I'm just going to limit it through looking at what we experienced over there. And I keep saying we because I didn't experience this in isolation. So I had another classmate of mine who was there, a classmate of Archita and Rinsi's as well. And even in my second half of my stint, there were other people. So all of them, we all thought about this. We all did a couple of things together, right? So I find it very weird to say I, so I'm always going to be alluding to we because we were all part and parcel of the same thing, right? So just to give a small look into what this place was, right? Now this area as such, it's placed in Orissa and at a town, near a town called Koraput. Okay, and to reach there was a journey in itself. You could take a flight, you could take a train. From there, you have to travel by road. From the town, you switch to a rickshaw. From the rickshaw, you go to a jetty where you switch to a boat, and then you reach the jetty point on the other side of the lake where you ultimately walk. And that's the photo that you can see. You walk to the last stretch towards the hostel and the school, right? So that itself was quite a tedious journey. Okay. And when we reached there, if you can see the surrounding, that's pretty much the surroundings that we had. This was somewhere in the month of late winter, right? And so it's not too green, but normally in summer that's also completely dry. And here we don't have any such visibility in terms of development. There's no electricity that was there. The village houses were made from your mud and gobar, okay, that is cow dung, pasted across the walls. You had grass that was being dried and mixed, and that's how the walls of their structures were made. So all very temporary sort of houses, and it's within this space, right? It's within this space. So one of the things that first hit us when we went over there was that we've come to a very different space, a very different paradigm shift, as I mentioned, in terms of a cultural, social, as well as a linguistic space. um, the school now itself, to give you some very interesting fun facts about the area, like I said, it was placed near this place called Koraput, and the village that we went to, at one point of time, it was quite lower down into the valley, right? This is like, I'm not a very good photographer, but this is the photo I could get from the highest hill, which was in the closest proximity to us. So if you can see the water actually snakes around between each and every hill that you can see in the distance. So actually the valley was even further down, and somewhere in the 1960s or 70s, when the Kolab Dam was built, the entire valley flooded up, and all the villages were either relocated from that area, or in the case of the villagers who stayed here, they just moved higher up into the valley, and they've settled in this place where we were at. Um, of course, that a lot of problems for them, created a lot of issues for them, but who's to listen, right? But then they made a life for themselves also in this place, and they did it to the best of their capability. Another thing about Koraput is it comes in the red corridor belt. And for those who are unfamiliar, I'm talking about the entire Naxal and the Maoist activities which go around in the north, not the north, the eastern side, ranging down from Bengal into down south as well. And if you Google the name of our school, one of the first things that you will find is a story by, I think, Sun Times, if I'm not mistaken, which talks about how two teachers were once kidnapped from the school and they were held to ransom. And obviously, this was the first thing that my mom found on Google. So one can imagine her immediate reaction to such stories when I said, this is where I plan to go now. Okay. And that kind of opened up an entire can of worms altogether. However, keeping that aside, we ultimately did find ourselves at that place. To just give you a sort of background into how the school functioned, the school itself was a branch to the Delhi Aurobindo Ashram. Right, the Aurobindo Ashram, more famously associated with the Pondicherry Ashram, but this was of a different management, of a different space, running from Delhi, and they had quite a few such establishments across the country, one of it being at this space. Okay. Being from Delhi, now most of the teachers who sort of came over there were very let's say limited to speaking within the Hindi language, because most of them came from around UP and surrounding neighboring states. So all the teachers who ultimately came to this place were dealing with Hindi. So the students themselves had to first learn Hindi before they were even taught the other languages. The other half of the teachers, like I mentioned, were from Odisha itself. So we had two tongues that were in circulation, that was Hindi and Oriya. And they themselves, of course, they were not called teachers. We all called ourselves, and the students also called us Didis and Bhaiyas. Okay, and if you can see the photo, that was my pet name, Maggie Bhaiya, because of the long beard hair that I sported for a long time over there. Right. In this period, I think for the 2 years and the 2.5 years actually that I was there, that was the only and a year after. I think all in all 3.5 years was only the sort of timeline that the students and the place had with any interaction with, let's say, people like us who came from an urban space. Because most of the other teachers themselves were coming from smaller towns as such, and even the ones who were from Delhi were not actually Delhi localites in many senses. They just came out from the Delhi ashram and the Delhi school. Okay, so this was just the way of how the people and the place sort of look like within the ashram system. Now, being part of Aurobindo and the mother, we did have a certain philosophy that narrated how the school would function. So there are many sort of ideas and beliefs which they like to propagate, but I've just highlighted the five most instrumental ones that are dealing directly with the educative aspect. So one of the best aspects that we really liked about the place was the concept of a free progressive education, right? Where you do not have any system of a standard. So the students themselves were kind of divided on based on their mental age and not exactly their physical age. We also did not have a very structured syllabus, so that allowed one to play around depending on how good you are with certain things and how students are also sort of responding. Yes, it did have challenges in that sense also, but it depends on how you are able to sort of play around with them. So traditionally, this is how a classroom would look on a very good day, where all of them are pretty into the class and sitting quietly, and I'm giving them something on the class board. I don't know what I'm doing here, but that's how it was. But one of the two other things that the schools kind of encouraged is the idea of free play, right? Where you bounce around with different things and that you bring into your classroom in such a way. I think here is the crux of their philosophy, which build a bond between the learner and the facilitator. So at this point, we stop using the term teacher completely. It encouraged a bond between the learner and facilitator. So most classes would ultimately at some point come down to looking like this, right? Nobody wants structured benches. Nobody wants the blackboard. Everybody likes to be doing their own thing and doing in their own way, right? So that's what this picture sort of represents. They were taught different subjects. Some of them were compartmentalized into how we normally understand the term sciences and social sciences, history, geography, maths, and we had the languages, right? Now, here is where the sort of problem what we faced began to creep in when we looked at the fact that irrespective of which language you are studying, the common area remained the English language. So it happened so that most of the students would be studying and giving their examinations for the IGNU board, and all of them had opted for the English medium. But the teachers themselves would very often go down to talking and explaining in Hindi, in some cases Oriya, right? Even though the text was in English, the ultimate question papers and examinations would be in English, right? And this sort of started creating a problem that we noticed amongst them. I remember some of the classes when I used to just initially I was doing only languages with them. I was just doing not languages, sorry, I was just doing English language with them. But ultimately, after about I think 8 months, I started doing social sciences and a bit of science also. I did 2 years of science, so I had certain knowledge about it to be able to teach them at least certain aspects of chemistry and physics. And there we discovered this language, which became a huge intrinsic problem. So this is where I go back. I'll sort of borrow from what my good friend Tauseef mentioned about a space and a linguistic that is sort of coming out of a person's culture, a person's society, right? And that all those aspects go into the understanding of a language. So I'd just like you all to just keep that part what Tauseef had said in mind when we just go to look on to the next part. Uh, One of the first places that we tried to experiment with that was through the concept of music itself, where we looked at sort of mixing and matching what we knew, what they knew, and also the atmosphere that was sort of available to us. Right. So when we talk about music, one of the great things that we found over there amongst the children is that right from a young age, they were dealing with music and learning of musical instruments. That's not to say their own culture did not have music. Yes, they did have music very similar to the kind of music that Dr. Lily was playing yesterday, where you have bass drums which sort of form a beat and they sang their songs. But in the school itself, they were taught to play the flute, they were taught to play the tabla. While we were there, we were trying to teach them a bit of guitar as well. And they were many good singers. So we had Barun Pal, who is a very famous classical musician. He's come to the school once or twice and he used to teach the kids, and they had a sort of concerts of their own, which was really great to see. So somewhere they already had notions of music very strongly entrenched in them right from the beginning itself. when we looked at English songs, so like I mentioned, when we first went there, we were really psyched about the fact that they were singing songs from the Jungle Book, Wizard of Oz, and they also knew a few Christmas carols as well. So every Saturday evening, we would sit with them for about an hour, and we would teach them some new songs, right? Because we all know key songs are a very good way to work on pronunciation, and you could also use that further to sort of exemplify meanings and how it's used in a sentence and a space and in an understanding, so on and so forth. Of course, both of us did not like to limit to Jungle Book and Wizard of Oz type songs, so we went on to teaching them some of Dylan's famous numbers, Blowing in the Wind, Redemption Song. We went to Bob Marley's Redemption Song, like I said. We taught them some ABBA, and of course, their favorite song was John Lennon's Imagine. So we use these songs to try to get them into an English pronunciation. That's where it all started from. But later, then we also realized that these same things could be used to sort of explain concepts and meanings to them in terms of words. However, what we weren't ready for, and in the start, right, is we realized the students themselves have their own understanding. And like Tauseef mentioned, their brain works in a different way, right? Obviously, we had no idea of how that direction is going to go. Over time, when I say about fusion, over time, they had started putting in their own tune, and they had started putting in their own intonation into each of these songs. Now, if you look at the concept of fusion on Google, you'll get a very different understanding of what I'm trying to explain. So just to get what fusion in the sense that I'm speaking is, if you look at, say, from the South, you have the bands, Avial or Taikuda, right, which is using modern rock, bringing in Mallu songs. You have a Neeraj Arya who is using songs from the Sufi mystics, and he's bringing it into a mainstream sort of musical way. Look at what Nescafe Basement, look at what Coke Studio. These are all forms of different fusion music that you are trying to bring in, which has a certain weight and a certain message at the same time, right? If I use a very colloquial Hindi word, they sort of upnofied the songs to suit their style and their way of singing and their way of doing things, right? And we realized, this is a really great space to engage with them on a more higher level than just teaching them a particular song. So like I said, they already were very well versed with the tabla, the flute, the manjira. The manjira is that the bell, the tongue sound which you have, which you'll hear in many temples. And of course, we had a guitarist amongst us. My friend Sumanto was a guitarist, so he used to use the guitar itself. In this sort of fusion, we did a lot of experimentation, right? And one of the things that we ultimately did is we created a fusion where we picked up Indian instruments and sort of brought all those into the song. The first song that we performed, if you can see this photo, it's slightly unclear, it's taken off a printed version, but here is one of the performances that we first did. We had the DG of Koraput who was visiting the school, and we had some other small time and big time people from the town who came to visit the school. So we gave them a sort of performance. That was something that the school liked to do when we had visiting people. So here you can see the kids on the tabla, we have one on the bongo, we have one on the manjira, is not visible, and one of the girls in the corner, unfortunately not visible in the photo, was playing the flute as well. And this was a rendition, or a, let's say, upnofied rendition of the song Imagine. And it was really nice to hear the way that they actually brought about this song with their own. It wasn't completely Hindustani in some sense. Like I said, they also had elements of their own singing style that they hear back from home, the way that they brought this up in the music. Western clothes were a choice that they made, right? I told them, here's the storehouse, pick out what you need, and this is what they got. Just a side note, I'm always about breaking sort of barriers. So one of the girls very randomly mentioned, Bhaiya, why don't you dress up like us? I was like, why not? So in that photo, I'm actually wearing the same uniform, if I can call it, what the girls are wearing. So I'm wearing the vest, the shirt, and the skirt, and that was it had mixed reactions, obviously, depending on who viewed it, right? It had mixed reactions, but that was just an attempt to break this sort of gender roles and stereotypes that was unfortunately sort of prevalent over there. So we should keep trying different ways to sort of break that sort of cycle. um, from there, so when we did this musical fusion, we also decided, you know what, hey, let's take it one step further. Let's try to bring in their language itself into this musical aspect, because here we found they're already very enthused about doing things their way, right? So we now started learning a bit of their language, which is, they call it as Desia. Desia itself is not a pure language of one type. In fact, the first three villages which you touch when you walk from the school, that is Ratamati, Girlagoda, and Nuagoda. Sorry, these are names of the villages, but they used to speak a kitsch of Desia, which had slight variances even amongst the settlements. But when you went to the other end, you reached this slightly upper caste village of Girlagoda. They spoke a slightly different language as compared to Desia, right? So that is one thing we have to constantly juggle every time we try to bring in the local language. But we did an attempt of using at least Desia, because that's a tongue that most of the students spoke, where we tried to translate these songs into their language. So we would take and imagine, and we try to translate these songs into that language to see how it would fit and how it would work out, right? It was obviously quite challenging, because one thing that happened, okay, yes, it was fun, I've written there, students really put their heart and soul in to try to make this happen. But the challenging part, what we found, was that many words, even the word imagine for that matter, are meanings which are actually missing from their lexical space, right? Something what Tauseef had just mentioned when he talked about the semantics and phonology and all these things. I just said lexical, but there are so many things which are missing from that understanding space, because these are words which are not usually let's say used in their day-to-day communication. So you found many such words which are missing from their lexical space. So then we sort of realized it's not always possible to go backwards from English to their language, right? And that's where it became the we started the evolution on another plane. So very often we would sit, stare at the horizon, and wonder, like, what can be done differently, what can we do differently, so that we're able to break these barriers that we keep reaching every day. Because we didn't want to be doing the same thing where we're telling them this is how you answer and this is how you think, so on and so forth, right? So we keep wondering of how we would do things differently. Yeah, this is just I just put this photo mainly because it's a nice photo, right? And this is Kamlu Kanu. He was one of the most acrobatic boys in our school. So he was doing some monkey business on that pole, to be honest. I just asked him to pose like that because the sky had a very nice pink hue, and I was like, just pose for a photo. And he obviously very happily obliged to that, right? But very often it was these evening times, right, when we would sit in and we would ponder about what can be done differently and how do we approach certain problems that we were sort of facing. So here's where I said we didn't want to do an English to Desya backwards. Rather, we thought let's bring the Desya into the English in some sense. So some of the homework practices that we started with them, one of the things that we started was we asked them, go back whenever you. So they used to go home once a week. On Mondays, that was a half day. Yeah, we didn't have a vacation. We didn't have a holiday over there, right? Some of the college teachers cry, ki, oh, we have to work 6 days. But I tell them, boss, I have worked 6.5 days or 7 days for that matter. So this is not too bad. But when they used to go back home, they used, so we told them, like, next time when you go back home, start finding stories, start talking to your parents and your grandparents who are in the village, and bring stories from there. Use those stories in your stories that you are going to be writing in the class. It doesn't have to be an exact transliteration of what they are saying, but you can even use the ideas of or the stories that they are talking about from times they remember. And that's how we discovered stories about the village flooding and the problems that all of them went through when they were doing the entire shifting from the lower part of the valley to the upper part, right? But the best part about these exercises was that the students suddenly had greater interest in writing. Their discussions were crazy because they would talk to each other and they'll be like, no, what key, this is not that, yes, ye thodi hota hai. They would talk to each other and try to correct each other on what is the correct translation for that particular word, how it can be best discussed in English, right? So on some levels they were engaging on many different multiple levels in that sense to get that exercise kicked off, right? And like I'll show you here one of the later things that we did with the elder girls. I for my own this thing, I asked them, what, here are some standard sentences that you all use or what I use. Just tell me, how do I talk these words out in your language, right? And so first we did this one preliminary sort of exercises where they gave the equivalent in the English script itself. But of course, we later realized the English script is not the best script to capture so many variations in the way that you speak. And so we went on to rewrite it in the Hindi script. This was one of the first exercises that, and because of that, it looks like straight out of a grammar textbook, right? But I honestly used the grammar textbook initially to just get some sort of structure into this. But once we had these words out, very often what I would do is try to learn certain common patterns and certain common ways, and I would mix and match around this, and we would start talking to the kids in their language. One thing that it really helped was that it created a higher level of interaction between between us and between the kids themselves, right? Allowed for a greater level of interaction, and one of their favorite tasks was correcting it, right? So sometimes I would make a mistake, or Samantha would make a mistake, and they would come, what bhaiya, this is not aisa bolati, and they would start in one rant and then they would correct us, and they found that really amusing because suddenly there's a role reversal that's happened where they are the ones who are sort of correcting us for something that we are saying wrong, right? So that really amusing fact for them also allowed for greater levels of interaction and sort of connectivity that we could really build with these kids. um, so when I say also about bringing the Desya into English or bringing it into a learning educative space, you see the space that we look around. Now, when we talk about any language, a language is not void that exists only with certain words. But when you look at the meanings, it's also like Tauseef had mentioned about the cultural space, the physical space, and the societal space is around, right? It's very hard for them to read off an English textbook, grammar, maths, science, whatever, because the places, the examples, the situations that we are using is completely alien to them. To give you a most common example, what really struck me then was there was this kid, she had been learning, let's say, the nursery rhyme of Jack and Jill went up the hill. This is such a commonplace nursery rhyme for most of us, right? Now, she had been learning this rhyme. She must have heard it countless times over easily 4 to 5 years before she asked me this question. So one day, they were sitting and reading, and she just comes up to me with this nursery book. Firstly, I asked her, Sushi, why are you reading a nursery book? Okay, like you are like 12 years old. Allah, I give her time to read, to try reading something different. But she's like, Bhaiya, I just had one doubt. Allah, okay, fine, go ahead. So she's, she showed me this Jack and Jill copy that she had in the nursery book. And she asked me, she asked me, Bhaiya, what is Jack? And I was taken aback on two levels. Firstly, I was like, after 4 years or 5 years of listening to the song, you still don't know, identify Jack. And secondly, she has not been able to identify that Jack is the name of a person. She still wasn't sure that Jack is a thing or an actual person, right? And hence she had the question, what is Jack? So those such stories made us realize that it's not easy for them to learn from your regular material and text that we have, because you see that that Desya space is completely missing within the language and missing within whatever was normally being taught to them. So we did a lot of things. We tried a lot of things, right? I think in terms of science, we went out, we dropped balls to study gravity from the hostel terrace. We did cycling races to understand speed, velocity, and acceleration, and all different things. What was available to us, right? Even though we had a functional lab, uh, my knowledge was limited was one, but we had limited instruments also to really get into that. But they would really enjoy lab sessions because, there's nothing can beat the practicality of science over theory. So the last part I would come to the presentation is one of the problems that ultimately happened. For those who are aware of the politics of how an ashram works, you would be familiar with how there is a big disconnect that happens between the individual and the school and the community. And this was one of the problems what really unsettled us, right? This big gap that was happening between the individual and the community and the school and the community, to be precise. Over time, the kind of things that they were taught in school, and I don't mean just about the education, they were resorted to doing havans, which is not part of their cultural makeup. They were slowly forgetting aspects of their language because nobody was talking it in school. They were forgetting bits of themselves in that matter. They were forgetting bits of themselves because in the school space that was absolutely completely missing, right? So we try to do very different things where we try to engage ourselves with the space and with the community itself. So we can see this photo here. This is Tulika, right? A very cute girl. And this is one of our classrooms which we used to do it outside. It's like, what, the classroom space for them is very stifling in some sense because they're not used to being limited to four walls. So we used to have very often our classrooms outside. These are our most famous place was just around their community temple, where we had a lovely bunch of trees which are pretty easy to climb, and they would just settle on one branches and they would do their class. And of course, if it was me or somebody else, we also didn't have much to do around then, so we would also monkey around on trees. So this is a photo which is taken while I was hanging upside down. I was trying to be like them in some sense, right? I was trying to learn. They're crazy climbers. So we also got a lot of climbing that was done over there. When we speak about learning, sorry, I meant to say this before, but I got caught up into that. When you say about learning, it's like learning is not just about us teaching them something, right? We learn so much out of that place and space itself. I learned to play guitar there because over there. I learned swimming over there. I learned various other things just by being in that particular place and space because it just felt right to do it with them and in that space that we were. Another example of how we try to reach out to the community was now many of the teenage boys from the village who were not really studying in our school, they organized the sort of football tournament, and none of the students from our school were participating, but one of them came up to me and said, Bhaiya, if you don't mind, would you like to play? I was like, yeah, bring it on. I'm always ready for a game of football. So on the final day, I remember when we did have the, it was a big affair, like, how you'd imagine. There were streamers that were hung from tree to tree. They hired a speaker, they got it set up, playing music, and we even had a commenter. We had commentary which was done by one of our older students. His name was Balla. He did a commentary which was really nice and kept on going. The entire festival of sorts was created, and the students really wanted to come and join the game, right? They wanted to participate, if not directly by watching. So they came and asked me, like, Bhaiya, can we come and watch? As like, I mean, I would love to. So let's take permission. So they penned this very emotional letter and gave it off to the principal, asking for permission. She's like, yes, of course, y'all can go and all. So we all sat and we watched. I played and they watched, and everybody was cheering, laughing, so on and so forth, right? And after this, on the next day, one of them comes and asks me, if you don't mind, if it's not a problem with you, do you mind coming and partaking in Bhoji? Bhoji is sort of like a small gathering which they do after every event of a cultural nature, in this case of this particular football tournament that they organized. And I said, yeah, why not? And then he very quietly asked me, you eat chicken, no? I was like, yeah, okay. Because the school there itself was from a very veg point of view. So I was like, yeah, of course. So I remember that we had this boji ultimately in one of the abandoned village schools, right? So some of the village schools there don't function. So although the structure was there, they were used for various other purposes. So on that particular day, it was used as the hall where they had prepared some basic rice and some chicken curry, and we all sat down in a circle, and it was me amongst nobody from the school. It was me amongst all these young boys, some of them fathers to some of the kids whom I was teaching, and we all sat in a circle, right? No lights at all. So whoever had a flashlight put the flashlight on, and then we all participated in this boji. And so those are the various attempts that examples of those are various attempts that we try to do to bring the community together. Very often you try to bring some of the parents to school to sort of talk to the kids, tell stories to the kids, right? Of course, all this happened unfortunately towards the end of my stint, so I couldn't really take it up too much in practice. But we try to start that trend over there so much that the word amhi in their language is we, right? It means we, right? And it's all about bringing everybody and everything in the same space, so that it's sort of comfortable and it's sort of useful for anyone and everyone, right? So the aspect, yeah, so it just happened that I just used the examples of music and aspects of translanguaging, like talking in their tongue, English. We sort of mixed up everything, but it more importantly that a place where they really felt at home without necessarily being in home in that physical sense. But that's what we wanted to bring, because we found there and then is when they actually open up. So that's an icebreaker. You have to break those barriers, you have to break through all that in such a place where they're able to completely identify with what is being taught in some sense. And that's how the journey started. And this is just one of my favorite photos. These girls have grown up, of course, but this was taken 5-6 years ago. But it just sort of represents that laughter which all of us love to see on. With that, yes, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for the last.
Nigel, your voice was breaking. Can you hear me? Nigel, can you hear me? I think he's run into some problem again. We'll just wait for a few minutes. Okay, Professor Nigel will join us in a minute. He seems to be facing some audio problem. Thank you, Nigel, for that extremely wonderful presentation. It was so engaging and so lovely to hear this. I've heard most of these stories so many times, and yet every time I hear it, I'm still, I still feel the same way. And I hope I get to, I want to go to Kechla. Every time Nigel talks to me about Kechla and his experience, I always feel like going there and doing the same thing that Nigel and Sumanto did many years ago. So hopefully someday. Thank you so much, Nigel. I don't have a lot of questions because this is something I've heard from him for so long. And I did have one question where I wanted to know if they did something similar with other subjects, but he answered that to the course of the latter part of his presentation. Nigel, can you hear us? There are a few questions in the chat.
Right, I'm back on my phone. My laptop just decided to die as the presentation was. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. We'll start with Professor Jyotsna, who's raised her hand and she would like to ask you something. So, Jyotsna, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Muthiare. Nigel, wonderful listening to you. I have a two-parter, if you don't mind, Nigel.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so you have some of what you described reminded me of movies like Hitchcock, especially the part where you're talking about speed and velocity and bicycling and all of that. So my first question is, was there anyone who tried to play spoil sport in this kind of very free kind of pedagogy you guys seem to have? Either school authorities or someone else butting in and saying, what are you teaching them? What are they going to learn? I mean, instead of, or how will any of this help them pass an exam? Questions of that sort. How did you handle it? And my second question is, okay, sorry, I'll wait. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, sorry. So I thought you were done. There's this pause that keeps happening online, so I don't know if the person's finished or not. Sorry, finish the second
No, I
question.
can come back for the second one. Please go ahead. Sorry.
Right. So in terms of I mean, actually, those things were not really sort of questioned in some sense, because we realized those sort of things need to be done for them to be able to engage with those things, right? So they didn't really question too much on that sense. But of course, there would always be certain senior members who would turn their nose up in how you are structuring it, because when we obviously came with our own notions. That was actually more to do with an institutional questioning which they had, because we did not really necessarily follow their way in terms of following certain rules which we found completely pointless. Let me keep it that way, right? So they would question the way we did things, but not questioning about how we taught them in terms of cycling and those things, because that was this free play part was actually something which many people used to practice. But yes, like I said, the problem with that is how do you then bring it to the mainstream in some sense, because like I mentioned, they ultimately do go and give a mainstream exam. So the real problem was to bring them from there to the mainstream part, and to bridging that was the real challenge. So nobody minded how you did that, as long as it was sort of collating in tangible results in some sense, if I could put it that way, Josna ma'am. And now if you can ask me your second part of your question.
Okay, so was there a situation in the 2.5 years you spent there where you wanted to help somebody badly but felt helpless? Or, I mean, as a teacher, not in terms of academics, because you seem to have spent a lot of time with them outside the classroom as well. So maybe, I don't know if they're too young to have personal issues. I don't know, I mean, where they're coming from. But if you had to address a problem that a student was facing as a teacher, and you wanted to badly help, but was there a situation of helplessness which upset you that you couldn't really help somebody?
um there were so the thing about these kids was they did have a lot of personal issues, right? So one of the boys, Kamlu, in fact, in one very random drunken episode, his father's rifle went off and it grazed his back of his head, right? So even now he has a spot over here. Many of them don't have either or parents, and there's a lot of problem that goes around in the house, and very often they don't talk about it, right? They are very tight-lipped about these personal issues. But yes, when they come, we do our best to sort of deal with it, talk about it, because like I said, after a point, we became almost like siblings in some nature. So wherever we could, they did. But I think they also knew what kind of problems they need to come with. They had a certain level of maturity, which I must hand it to them, right? So not everything they would come to us, but things that they did come to us, we would try and in our best capacity to do it. So I say that because they've not really come with, I know they have much bigger issues, but they don't really approach they never approached us with those issues for me to know whether I would be able to help them in those sense or not.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Nigel, for both the responses. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question by Dr. Tauseef. He's asking, did you notice Udiya sound impact on their English, the students?
Not so much because they were actually not very fluent in the language itself. So one of the things that happened in the school is they were talking the Desial Bhasha from their home. Now the Desial Bhasha was actually quite like I could hear elements of Marathi in it. Sumanto came and he could hear elements of Bengali in it. So it was a very mixed, can I say, khichdi of languages that was there. So I couldn't say it was only in Oriya. And they ultimately, one of the first languages they dealt with after Desia was directly Hindi and thereafter English. So their engagement with Oriya was very, very less for it to make any sort of visible pronunciation effects in their English pronunciation, at least. Tauseef, I hope I'm able to answer that.
We have a question from an EJP student. Everything you said was so fascinating. This looks like a very effective way to educate children. How do we make it mainstream?
The problem with trying to make this mainstream is that when we look at our at the one thing that you notice about most of our education is geared towards very often towards a profession, right? And when you think about mainstreaming it in this sort of sense, it might not always work, because one of the things, like I'll tell you, some of these older kids now who've passed out and they are now learning in other institutes outside the school. uh, Many of them have and I speak to somebody or the other every second week. I call up somebody or the other now and just have a word with them to see how what's up, in some sense, right? So initially all of them felt this sense of displacement, right, where they're not comfortable in just being surrounded by people they don't really know, because that school system where they were was from very different. Secondly, the teachers themselves are very cut off from the student, so such problems were there. And it took a lot of time for them to adjust to this process of a streamlined education, which is preparing you for something concrete in the future, which is not something that really happens. So if you have to bring something like this to the mainstream, you will have to tweak it depending on the society that you are going to use it. You can't keep it completely free play. So like I said, even when ultimately, the reason I stayed on for that extra one or half year or 1 year extra is because the oldest batch of girls were just about to give their exams, and it felt a little weird to leave them halfway in between, because I was already teaching them 3-4 subjects. I felt it weird to leave them, right? So even that process of sort of preparing them for just your IGNOU mainstream exams was a task in itself, because it's something very outside their space what they are used to. So using like this, actually in Delhi Ashram they have Mirambika, which is the school which runs on the same philosophy, right? But and even in Bangalore, actually many cities, they do have versions of this, but not exactly in the same free play manner. But yes, there are variations possible. But then, as I said, you have to sort of tweak it to adjust to the society to whom it's ultimately going to be taught to.
Thank you. We have Shefali from the department saying this was completely wonderful. Thank you, Professor Nigel.
Thanks.
Okay. Etienne sir says, thank you very much, Nigel. Fascinating, absolutely.
Thank you, sir. It's a product of those 2 years in your classes as well.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Nigel.
Thank you, Archita, and thank you, everybody else.
Thank you, everybody, for joining in. That's the end of our staff causerie. A big thank you to all our new faculty, Dr. Achyut Ajit, Dr. Lilikuti Abraham, Dr. Tauseef, Ms. Einstina Sneha, and Mr. Nigel. Big thank you also to Drishti and Rajalakshmi for all the help at the back end, and Shefali for all the help with the posters. And thank you, Arul sir, for organizing this as well. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope also thank you to Jyotsna for hosting this yesterday. Thank you. Have a lovely evening. We shall see you with another program from the department soon. Thank you.